Okay, so we are starting the sixth parak, and this parak is all about Brochos, which means the blessings on food, and we will see later also blessings on smell. So there's the beginning chapters of the Tractate Brochos were really a lot about Kriya Shema, the blessings on Shema, before Shema, after Shema, the Shemona Esrei, the prayers, all the prayers, and now we're going to actually discuss the blessings on food. So the Mishnah begins, we're on page 35a, the new chapter, 35a, and the Mishnah begins, Ketzad mevarchen al hapiros. How does one recite the bracha on fruits? And what this means is that which blessings do you say? What are the wording? What's the wording of the blessings? So the Mishnah says, Al piros ha'ilon, on fruits from a tree, who Aimer, one says, he says, Bayrei pri ha'etz, thanking Hashem who created the fruits of the tree. And the Mishnah doesn't tell us the beginning of the blessing because that's obvious. It's Baruch, the beginning of the blessing is the regular beginning, Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech ha'olam. And then, after you say the beginning part, then how do you end it? So for fruits of the tree, one says Bari pri ha'etz. Chutz min hayayin, the Mishnah quickly tells us that excluding wine. Wine is an exception to the rule, which means that the main purpose of grapes is wine. That would be the most usable, the most important byproduct or outcome of the grapes, usage of the grapes would be to make wine. And really, wine should be the blessing, Beirei Pri Ha'etz. Logically, you should say the blessing that God creates fruit from the tree on wine. However, the Mishnah tells us that no, wine is excluded from this category. Sha'al hayayin hu aimer beirei pri hagefen or hagofen. On wine, one says the blessing who creates the fruit from the vine, and there's a special reason why wine has this special blessing, even though it should be included in the category of fruit. And the Rashi tells us, the top line, Shemitay chashivusai, because of its importance, kavulai bracha liatzmai. They established a blessing on its own. That the rabbis they made a rule that they authored a blessing that one should recite on wine, and the same is for bread. That even though bread is really grain, however, because of its exceptional quality, its chashivos, its importance, its significance, therefore it has a blessing of its own. So the Mishnah continues, and it says, "Shalayayin ho'aimer ber pri hagofen." For wine, one says the blessing ber pri hagofen. Val peiros haaretz, on fruits from the ground, which means vegetables. Who Aimer, he says, Beirei Pri Ha'adama. One recites the bracha who creates the fruits of the Adama, of the ground, of the earth. And that but there is an exception to that rule, and that is Chutz min hapas. That the exception to that rule is bread. Because on bread, as Rashi told us, Rashi just told us that bread, because of its significance, the rabbis gave it a blessing of its own, and now the Mishnah tells us what is that blessing. He who takes out bread from the earth that is the thanks that we give Hashem for bread. So instead of just saying he creates the vegetables, the fruits from the earth, instead we say he takes out bread from the earth. So we give a special praise for bread. Now, what about yerakos? Now, yerakos generally would be translated as vegetables, but we already mentioned vegetables. So we are obviously dividing the category of vegetables into two parts. The Mishnah will tell us that there's two opinions here, but there is another type of vegetable that we're talking about here, and that is legumes. They are like, for example, maybe herbs and beans and other seeds. And so the Mishnah tells us on these items, the first opinion is, it's all included in the category of vegetables. That's the first opinion. Reb Yehuda says, no, there's a special category for these, a special blessing, and that is Barei Mine Deshoyim, who creates different types of grasses. And what the meaning of this is that Reb Yehuda says that we have to thank Hashem for each item specifically. So instead of giving general blessings, Rabbi Yehuda says, no, we should specify the blessings and be more exact onto what the blessings of each of the vegetables should be. And so Rabbi Yehuda says that you recite another blessing, a different blessing for these legumes, and the blessing that he says is Vayrei Mine Deshoim. Now, the Gemara, of course, tells, well, we know that we don't follow Rabbi Yehuda's view, but that is, this is his opinion, that everything should be specified. Now, the Gemara begins, and I have to tell you that it's going to go back and forth. This Gemara, it's going to give us one way of understanding the source, and then it's going to prove it wrong and go back and forth. And so what in Yiddish, what's called is you have to halt cup. You have to just keep on track. We're holding here, we're going to prove it wrong, then we'll go back and we'll prove something else wrong, and then we'll go back. So it's going to be a back and forth in the Gemara. Yes, Edith.
I wanted to ask you, what about dates? Because you said that dates, you can also say the same blessing is for bread. And I thought now that bread has its own, it was established just for bread.
Right. You're remembering from like a while back that I mentioned something unique about grapes, about dates.
No,
yes.
About dates.
Dates,
so is that going to be one of the things that goes back and forth? So I don't want to bother.
No. We're not really dealing with dates. No, that's not here. Not yet, at least. But dates is a unique food that it does give some type of a sustenance similar to bread. But the proper blessing on it would be the ha'etz blessing, the fruit blessing, even though it happens to have a special quality in it. And the question really would be, Edith, is if a person did recite the Hamotzi Lechem Min Haaretz on dates, would he fulfill his obligation after the fact? After the fact, would he fulfill his obligation? And we had an interesting Gemara about that a while back. the bracha on. But the answer to your question is it's barei priyot. You'd say the regular, blessing on fruit. Okay, so we're going to now start the Gemara. Minahani mili. How do we know this? That a person has to recite a blessing before he eats. Where do we see such a thing? Where does this come from? Why does one need to recite a blessing? How do we know that you have to recite a blessing before you eat? And I should preface this with the fact that the grace after meals, the Torah tells us, v'achalta v'savata uveirach. You should eat, you should be satisfied, and you will bless. And what does that imply? That biblically, that's a verse in the Torah. V'achalta v'savata uveirach is a verse in the Torah. And that teaches us that biblically, one would recite a after blessing on eating a meal. That's what we would see from that verse. But that doesn't really tell us much about a bracha before eating. So we don't know about before eating bread. We don't know about before eating fruits and vegetables. We don't know before drink. We don't know the source yet of reciting a bracha before food. We do know is that after eating a meal, there is a bracha that the Torah tells us. The Torah obligates us to say some type of a grace after meal. It's not clear what the wording would be, but it's definitely a biblical obligation to recite a blessing after a meal. But that doesn't tell us much about after a non-meal, like a snack. And it doesn't tell us much about before a meal, but a person need to recite a bracha. Yes, Ben.
We're saying it in the morning prayers.
What do we say?
After Shema.
That what?
Im Shamoa Tishma, b'mitzvotai and so forth. He will give the rain. And iten matar be'ito, yoreh malkosh, and so forth. And then it says, ואספת את גנך ותירושך ויצרך, ונתתי עשב בשדה, ואכלת ושבעת וברכת.
Okay.
That's all that people can understand.
It says ve'achalta v'savata.
וברכת.
What's the words? ונתתי עשב בשדך לבנתך ואכלת ושבעת. הישמר לכם.
Oh, okay.
So,
right. So that's the biblical sentence that's in the morning.
But that's not the one. No, that's not the sentence of ubeirachta.
No.
That one doesn't say ubeirachta. But the ubeirachta is another place in the Torah.
When it discusses the Sheva Minim at that point, that's where it says it.
So the Gemara now is going to try to figure out how do we know you recite a bracha before? So the Gemara says, Menah hani mila. From where do we know these things? That you have to recite a bracha before you eat. The Tano Rabbanan, because the rabbis learned in a brayso. And the rabbis learned that it says, Kodesh Hilulim LaHashem. It says in the verse regarding the fourth year's produce, that this produce is holy and it is praises to Hashem. Which means that after a person grows produce for fruits for 3 years, he's finally allowed to eat from the fruits. The first 3 years, he's not allowed to benefit and eat from the fruits. They're called arla. But after the 3 years, then he's supposed to, on the fourth year, he takes those fruits and he brings them to Jerusalem, And what does he do with them? He rejoices with Hashem over his new produce. Hashem gave us the land of Israel. We planted, we now have produce, the 4th year. The first year that we're allowed to eat from these fruits, Hashem says, no, don't just eat from it. You have to bring it to Jerusalem. Now, I should mention that there are some laws. It's important for you to know to understand the Gemara. The 4th year fruit, you are supposed to eat and enjoy, but you have to bring it to Jerusalem and enjoy, so to speak, with God. Now, what happens if you have too much fruits to carry, too many, it's too heavy. So what you are allowed to do is, if you're not in Yerushalayim yet, if you're not in the city of Jerusalem yet, you're allowed to redeem it. So you can redeem the fruits for money, carry the money to Jerusalem, and in Jerusalem you could buy food over there and eat it and rejoice with Hashem over your 4th year's produce. So this is called Netat Revai, the 4th year's produce. And we will see in the Gemara that there is an argument if the 4th year produce has this law only regarding grapes, or does it apply to all produce of the 4th year? And so there is an argument if it's called Neta Revai or Kerem Revai. Is it a 4th year law about a kerem, a vineyard, meaning grapes? Or is it a law regarding all types of trees, fruits, that they all are included in this rule that biblically one would need to bring all those fruits to Jerusalem, or redeem them and take the money to Jerusalem and enjoy buy fruits and so on and enjoy it there. Yes, Ezra.
I got a question for you. The statement says that from this you see that you have to make a bracha before and after, and I just don't see. I mean, I don't see where the before comes from this particular statement.
Yeah. Okay. So I didn't explain it yet. I'm just started discussing Neta Revai. Yeah, but
sorry.
So the Gemara is trying to figure out the source. So the Gemara says we have a brisa. It says Kodesh Hilulim LaHashem. So Kodesh Hilulim, there are praises that one says to Hashem for this special holy 4th year produce. So what is the 2 praises? Hilulim is a plural. So you're going to be eating this produce, and it's going to necessitate 2 praises to Hashem. So the Brisa understands this to mean Melamed shetu'unim bracha lifnehem uliacharehem. This teaches us that produce, fruit trees that you're going to be bringing, you're going to be bringing the produce to Israel, they require a blessing before and after it. Because it says the plural, hilulim, this is food that requires double praises to Hashem. So the Bryce understands simple. What are the double praises? Before you eat it, after you eat it. So you go to Jerusalem, before you eat it, you recite a blessing. And after you eat it, you recite a blessing. And that's the source of reciting brachos. Mikanam Rabbi Akiva. From here, Rabbi Akiva says, Asur liyadam, it is prohibited for a person to do what? Li sheyitoim klum koydem sheyavarech. For a person to taste anything before he recites a bracha. So what it sounds like from this brisa is that we see from the produce of the 4th year, where we're supposed to be praising Hashem twice. The understanding is that from there we should learn that all times when you eat, you would be reciting a bracha before and after, and it's prohibited to taste anything before you recite a bracha.
Rabbi.
Yes.
Why? So I'll play devil's advocate. Why can't the two brachot be the bracha before and then say Shechianu?
Uh-huh.
And then
So
there's no
maybe,
bracha afterwards. And the
uh-huh.
bracha afterwards is covered by Savato Barachta, okay? And you were satiated and you blessed. So
Right.
why ought to, so why not read it in that particular way?
Right. So the question is, maybe this should be a Shechianu blessing instead of a blessing on the actual food. That could be. It's a very good question. Even though we know the halacha is that a person does not recite a Shechianu if they had that fruit, even if it's not theirs. But logically, maybe could be the lesson here. In other words, how does the Brisa know to learn it this way? Just because it says hilulim, and it makes sense. It's your produce that you grew, you just grew. So logically, it makes sense, right? You should say a Shechianu on it. So it's a good question. I have to look into it. I have to see if any commentaries talk about it. Okay, so the Gemara now says, "V'hai kodesh hilulim lehachi hu da'asa." Does this pasuk kodesh hilulim? Does it need? Is it needed for this? Is it used? Is it used for this purpose to teach us about a bracha before and after? The Gemara says, "Hi mi boile chad." We need this pasuk of hilulim, this word of hilulim, to teach us. Hi mi boile chad diyamar achmana achle v'hadar ochle. For one lesson, one teaching, one law, that first the Torah tells us that if you want to, in order to bring it up to Yerushalayim, so if you want to eat the produce without bringing it to Yerushalayim, you need to first redeem it, and then the money takes on the holiness, and the fruits are now edible here outside of Jerusalem. So if you want to eat it outside of Jerusalem, you would be allowed to, as long as you first redeem it and put the value of these fruits on the money, and then you would be allowed to eat it here in a state of unholiness. It's not holy anymore, so to speak.
Rebbe, so this is
Yes.
part of the question. The question is continuing. You're saying
I did half. You just muted yourself. Isaac, you muted yourself. But you're right. This is part of the question. I didn't get to the other half yet.
It's
It takes time.
explaining some of the other things that we need this pasuk for.
Correct. There's two things that we really need this for. So the Gemara is in the midst of asking, are we able to learn that you need to recite a bracha before and after? Because it says hilulim. We're going to now use the word hilulim for other purposes. So it's not extra. It's not able to be used for teaching about the bracha before and after, because it's needed for two other teachings. And what are the two other teachings? So one of them is that first you need to redeem the fruits, and then you would be allowed to eat them outside of Jerusalem. And what that means is that the Gemara is taking the word hilulim and saying hey and ches are interchangeable. So hilulim could be changed for chilulim. And chilulim means to redeem it, to be mechalal it on money, to redeem the holiness onto the money. The money will then be brought to Jerusalem. You'll buy fruit in Jerusalem and eat it over there. In the meantime, the fruit that's here, so for example, you have a case of oranges, Jaffa oranges, and you want to bring them to Jerusalem, but you say, you know what, it's too heavy. And actually, you're pretty hungry right now, and you'd like an orange right now. So what do? You could redeem it for money and say, okay, this is worth this orange is worth $1. Redeem it for $1, and the $1 you'll take to Jerusalem. In the meantime, you're allowed to eat the orange. What about saying, oh, I'm going to bring $1 later? Can I do I'll bring $1 with me? No, you need to first redeem it for the $1, and then you can eat that orange in Israel, even though you're not in Jerusalem, but you can eat that orange there where you are.
Rabbi.
Yes, David.
No, it's Moshe.
Yeah, Moshe, David had his hand up. Just give me 1 second, and then we'll get to you, Moshe.
That's
David.
okay. Let Moshe go first. That's okay.
Okay, Moshe.
A very simple answer. It seems like it's a form of equity. You're placing a value on it, ahead of time, before you take it to Jerusalem. Therefore, you can eat it outside of Jerusalem. You see what I'm saying? In other words,
I'm not sure what you're saying.
No, I'm just saying
it does have a value.
You place
What?
that value on it, so it becomes like equity. Before, if you pay for it, you're elevating it to that point before, and therefore you can eat it before it goes to to Jerusalem. Am I correct? I mean that's the way it seems.
I'm just thinking about what you're saying. So you're saying that maybe there's an element of equity here that the Torah is teaching us. Or some I'm not really sure. Explain what.
No, I'm just saying it's ahead of time. You're paying for it and you're elevating it, and therefore you're able to eat it because you don't have to go to bring the produce to Jerusalem. In other words, once you put the value on it and it's paid for, that acts in that capacity.
But it's not putting the value on it. It's actually exchanging it for the money. In other words, you have to it's not a good enough just to say, well, it's worth $1, this orange. I'm all set now because I evaluated it. That's not good enough. It actually has to be transferred to the actual dollar.
I see.
Okay.
Rabbi, I still don't understand it.
Okay, let me just get David's question
Go
first.
ahead.
David.
Yeah, I'm just going back to what Rabbi Akiva said, that a person's forbidden to taste anything before he says a bracha. And I'm wondering, is it significant that he uses the word taste instead of eat?
That's very a good, interesting point that he uses that word litoim, to taste, because we did have a Gemara about tasting that you don't have to recite a bracha for. So you're asking based on a previous Gemara that we learned that when you taste food, if you just taste it, you really don't have to recite a bracha. And here he's saying that he's using the term taste with regard to a bracha. That's a very good diuk. A good
Good point.
Got a good,
What does
good
he
point
just
there.
mean bringing it to his mouth?
But that's the question. We've learned before that you really don't have to recite a bracha when you bring it to your mouth. It's only when you swallow it would be the, in fact, there's a whole question about bubblegum. Do you recite a bracha on bubblegum? But at least bubblegum, you do swallow some of the, some flavor. But it is we had a Gemara before about not reciting a bracha for when you taste food, when the chef tastes the food, do they recite a bracha? That's so.
I would think it is the chef is different. He's preparing it. It's part of his malacha as part of the preparation. It's not meant to eat. But I would think any yachid walking by a plate it's not part of his job to taste it, to prepare the food for somebody else, and therefore you do have to make a bracha. I always learned you do have to make a bracha when you taste something casually, not cooking. That you taste while you're doing. Does it need more salt? It's very different than tasting something to see if you want to keep eating it.
So the thing is, Isaac, that Tosfos on that Gemara mentioned that there's a difference between if you taste it and spit it out, or if you taste it and eat it. So even the chef, when they taste it and eat it, then they would say a bracha. But when they taste it and spit it out, that's when you wouldn't recite a bracha. Now, I do see one commentary here mentions that what Rabbi Akiva is emphasizing is that it's even if it's less than a size of an olive, that just like one cannot benefit from something holy, even a drop, so the same thing would apply to eating before reciting a bracha. It would even be if it's a speck, if it's a tiny amount. And so maybe that's why he uses the term tasting, emphasizing that achila normally means a sizable amount. So he used the word litai. Now, he doesn't say these words. I'm adding it into his insight. He's trying to say, what did Rabbi Akiva add? What's Rabbi Akiva's message? It's that even on less than a kazayas. But what I think, if you want to take with your diuk, the way with your question, you could, connect these 2 points and say that he's specifically using the word te'ima, the word toyem, which means to taste, because the word oichel often means a kazayas. And so he uses that word. So maybe that would be an answer to your question.
Why? Could it be that everything that we're discussing over here is with respect to the importance of the fruit that you're bringing for the 4th year, and that's the reason why Rabbi Akiva is basically saying for these particular items that you're bringing in the 4th year, because of what they are and their importance, you can't even taste it without making a bracha.
You're asking if Rabbi Akiva is specifically talking about the fruit of the 4th year versus all food. Is that what you're asking? That maybe Rabbi Akiva is specifically referring to specifically this food. And it from his wording, it sounds like he's talking in more of a general statement. That's what you know what I mean. That's what it seems like. He's giving you a general statement about, in general, you're not allowed to taste anything without without reciting a bracha.
Okay.
So, yeah, so maybe I think that answers your question, though. Yes, Ben.
Okay, I didn't understand the point that you said before you eat it, you have to go and pay for it in Jerusalem, then you can eat it outside Jerusalem.
So let me explain.
How do you do that?
You're in Yafo, okay?
Okay.
And you have a orchard of orange trees.
Yeah.
And you have a whole case of oranges you take to Jerusalem. Yeah. But you know what? You're a little hungry now.
Right.
And you'd like to have an orange before you get to Jerusalem. So in this scenario, because you want to eat it here, we tell you, no, you're not allowed to. You have to bring it to Jerusalem and rejoice in Jerusalem. You're in Yafo now. You're not in Jerusalem. You got to go to Jerusalem to rejoice. But if you really want, you could buy it. You could transfer the orange onto $1. And now that orange becomes unholy. And the dollar becomes holy. And when you get to Jerusalem, you'll buy an orange in Jerusalem with that dollar, and you'll fulfill the obligation. You'll fulfill the obligation of that orange that you ate here by spending that dollar in Jerusalem and eating the new orange.
But you eat it before you get to Jerusalem.
So now you can eat it now. You're really hungry now. So eat your orange now, as long as you already transferred the holiness onto the dollar.
Okay, so
Okay.
you can't go to Jerusalem and give the dollar with the rest of the
And take that dollar.
No, you got to take the dollar to Jerusalem.
Yeah, you take the dollar to Jerusalem and give it
And
with
then
the
you
oranges
spend
that are
it.
left.
And buy an
Or
orange in
anything.
Jerusalem.
No,
Or you have
And
to buy
celebrate,
You buy
or anything.
anything.
Right. Right.
Okay.
Any food product. Yeah. Okay. So
but not water and salt.
right. So the Gemara says
And
that
maybe not bubble gum.
No,
that
you can't.
Hilulim, the Hilulim that we're talking about, the word Hilulim is used as if it said Chilulim, that Kodesh Chilulim LaShem, that if you want to eat it where you are, you have to make sure first to be mechalal it, to make it unholy. Make it unholy by transferring the holiness onto money. And v'hadar achle, and afterwards you would be allowed to eat it here, where you would be allowed to eat it here, even though you're not in Jerusalem yet. And so that's one meaning of Hilulim. And the other meaning is, and the other lesson from the word Hilulim is v'idach, the other one, davar hatoon shira toon chilul. Something that needs to be, that requires song, the song of the Levites, that's what needs to be redeemed. V'she'enai toon shira, something that doesn't require the song of the Levites, that they would sing when they would pour the wine on the altar, that's when they would sing. So something that doesn't require that, like something that's not grapes, so that Einai To'on Chilul does not need to be redeemed. You're not obligated to bring it to Jerusalem. So this is obviously the opinion of that only grapevines are required to be brought, the grapes are required to be brought to Jerusalem, but not other produce. And this, according to this view, the reason it says Kodesh Hilulim LaHashem, that the holies get praise for Hashem, we're translating it to mean two things. One is that in order to eat it here, we first have to be mechalal it. You have to transfer it onto money, transfer the holiness onto money, and then you make the fruit itself mundane, unholy. And the other thing that we're learning is that something that's hilul, that needs that requires praise and song, that's what you have to be mechalal. That's something that you would need to, that you would have to deal with redeeming. But something that doesn't need to be praised would not need it. So we're teaching, we're saying that there's two lessons that are learned from the word Hilulim, and none of them have to do with reciting a bracha. So we can't learn from this verse anything about reciting a bracha. So again, we're trying to figure out a source to recite a bracha before the food. And here we've just said that even though we thought initially this would be a good source, now the Gemara says, no, it's not a good source, because we need this to teach us two other lessons from this word Hilulim. Yes, Moshe.
So in order to make it mechalal, you have to put a shtar on it. In other words, a contract in order to make it mechalal, right? Is that my understanding?
No.
There's no contract. I mean, well, how do you make it? How do you transfer it to the from money.
Take
you know,
the
from
orange
holiness.
in one hand, take the dollar bill in the other hand, and say, this orange, the holiness of this orange is transferred to this dollar bill.
That's a form of a
And
shtar,
goodbye.
right? That's a contract. Isn't that a form of a
No.
contract? You're making a
No,
contract.
you just said words. You didn't write anything. You said
There's verbal
words.
contracts too. I mean, there's verbal and written contracts. I mean, isn't that, wouldn't that be a form of a
You could
There
call
are
it a contract if you
verbal,
want.
handwritten contracts.
no, but I'm just saying you're
You
making
could call
a,
it, if you want to call it a contract, that's fine with me. I wouldn't use the term contract only if I wrote something. But if you want to use that term, I guess that's fine.
It's a promise.
Okay.
It's a transfer. It's not a
statement.
promise for the future. You're doing it right now.
I would call it a statement, but whatever. If you want to, you can say contract. Okay. So the Gemara tells us that it looks like we've got ourselves a little stuck here, because the problem is that we're trying to figure out a source for the bracha. And what we just did was we said that the law of neta rivai, the law of the fourth year produce, only applies to grapes. We've just said that because it only applies to an item that is, there are songs recited when you use that item, when that item is poured on is used on the altar, and that is wine. And so what comes out from this is that all the other produce will not require the fourth year to bring it to Jerusalem. Now, this is only one view. There are other views. So the Gemara is going to have to deal with that to figure out, well, what about according to the other views, maybe we do have a source to recite a bracha. So let's continue in the Gemara. So the Gemara now says, this goes like Reb Shmuel bar Nachmani in the name of Reb Yonasan. Because Rabbi Shmuel, the son of Nachmani, says in the name of Reb Yonasan, how do we know that the only song that's sang when the altar is absorbing some type of consuming something, there's a song, the only time that there's a song when the altar is consuming something is wine. In other words, when you sprinkle the blood, there is no song. The Levites don't sing. But when the altar is consuming the wine, that's when there is song. So the only time that the altar is consuming something and there's song is regarding wine. Shenemar, as it says in the verse, V'tomer lohem, and Hagefen, and the vine said to the other the vine said to the other fruit, the other trees, Hechadalti astiroishi hamasameach alekim ba'anoshim. It was regarding a parable. This verse is regarding a parable. We learned it together. Gidon had a son, and he had many sons, and he also had a son from a concubine. And that son from the concubine, people seem to want to hire to be the next leader. And they wanted to anoint this other son, who was really a very wicked person. And so one of the sons, this son from the concubine killed out all the other sons. But there was one son that was left. And he made this parable. He says, imagine if you go to the grapevine and say, all the trees go to the grapevine and say, could you be our king? And the grapevine would say, I should be your king, and I should, hechadalti estiroishi, should I withhold my wine, my vintage that makes happy Hashem and people? And then it goes to another tree, an olive tree. And also the olive says, should I withhold my oil? And then it goes to the thorn, and the thorn decides to become the leader. So it was a parable. But the point that we're going to take from this verse is that wine is something that makes Hashem happy and it makes people happy. And Rabbi Yonasan learns from this that when do you sing praises in the Beis Hamikdash for one of the for consumption of the altar, that is on wine, that they sing a shira on wine. So we see that from this verse that he uses the term that it makes Hashem happy and it makes people happy. Hamasameach Elokim ba'anoshim. Im anoshim mesameach Elokim b'ma mesameach. If it makes people happy, how does it make Hashem happy? Except, it's fine. We understand how it makes people happy, wine, but how does it make Hashem happy? So the Gemara understands from this, Mikan, or Rabbi Yonasan understands from this, and he teaches it, Mikan she'eino mim shira ela al hayayin. From here we see that you do not praise Hashem only for wine. Meaning that as one of the, when the altar is consuming either the sacrifices or the blood or anything that's being offered on the altar, the only time that we recite praises for consumption is, for the altar's consumption, is wine. And you see that from this verse, that it says it makes Hashem happy, which means we sing shira, we sing praises during the wine libation. Now, we've just concluded this point that we have initially a brisa that said that the word hilulim implies that you should recite a bracha before and after that. Whenever you have, it would imply whenever you have produce, you should recite a bracha before it and after it. Rabbi Akiva says anytime you taste anything, you should recite a bracha before it. And then the Gemara said, no, we actually need that verse for these other two teachings. And one of the teachings, we just finished proving that the idea of hilulim, praises of Hashem, refers specifically to wine. And that's why it says the word hilulim, not to teach us about a bracha, but to teach us about the law that it applies only to wine, that you have to bring you have to bring to Jerusalem and enjoy it there. It only applies to wine. Now the Gemara says this all goes well, that we're looking for a verse to teach us that you have to recite a bracha. If you learn the other way, that the fourth year produce applies to all fruits, not just to grapes. If you learn that, then you actually end up with an extra word here, because hilulim is not used to teach you something about praising Hashem only for wine. So you end up with an extra verse, an extra word, hilulim, praises, and you'll be able to learn from that that you have to recite a bracha. But if you learn that it only applies to grapes, then you don't have any extra verse to learn that you need to recite a bracha. So what the Gemara is concluding here is that everything seems fine and dandy as long as you learn that the fourth year produce applies to all fruits. Because if it applies to all fruits, we have an extra word, hilulim. And again, hilulim is plural, so it's as if it says it twice. and because it's plural and it's as if it says it twice, we're going to learn from there that you could recite a bracha. You have to recite a bracha. It deserves praise. Food deserves praise. And in addition, we also have that other lesson that you have to first redeem it before you enjoy it, if you want to eat it outside of Jerusalem. So the Gemara says, Hanicha, it's very good, Laman detani neta revoi, to the one that learns that neta revoi, all produce, all plants have a fourth year law, have the law of the fourth year. So we have an extra word, hilulim, because we're not going to use it just for the grapes to teach you it only applies to grapes, because this opinion holds it doesn't only apply to grapes, it applies to everything. And therefore, he's going to use the word hilulim to say that you have to recite a bracha of praise whenever you enjoy produce. But according to the opinion that says that it only applies to grapes, and therefore you're going to use that extra word hilulim to teach you that it only applies to grapes, my ikal meimar, how are you going to learn that you have an obligation to recite a bracha before eating? The itma Reb Chia Reb Shimon Berebi, because we did learn in a brisa an argument if it applies to only grapes or it applies to all produce. Yes, Ben.
Yeah, that's what I don't understand. How do they get to produce? Bikurim is your first fruit. How is wine becoming a first fruit? It's already transferred from grapes to wine. It's not the first fruit anymore, it's a wine.
So first of all, we're not talking about first fruits here. We're talking about the fourth year of a vine, the whole year, not just the first, the bikurim, which you're referring to. We're talking about the fourth year, all the anything that comes out of this orchard or this vineyard, whatever it is, for this whole year is really holy fruit. It's holy. Whatever you make out of it, if you make oil, you make wine, it's holy, and that it has to be brought to Jerusalem. And there is a option of redeeming it, but it would need to be brought to Jerusalem. Now, according to one opinion, it's not all produce. It only applies to grapes. And the source of that would be this verse, Hilulim. That
so
Hilulim,
on the fourth year, you bring Bikurim and the fourth year produce?
Oh,
only
so
on the
you're
fourth year?
So Bikurim, I don't believe you would bring Bikurim on the fourth year. On the fifth year, you would start bringing Bikurim. Yeah.
That's what I'm asking. Okay.
So the Gemara says that there's an argument, and we mentioned that there is this argument of these two rabbis, Rabbi Chia and Reb Shimon Berebi, Reb Shimon the son of Rebbe. Chad Tani Kerem Revoy, one of them learns that the fourth year is all about a kerem, a vineyard. And the Chad Tani Neta Revoy, and one of them learns any type of plant would be obligated, any type of a tree plant would be obligated in the fourth year produce. Ulaman de Tani Kerem Revoy. Now, the Gemara says that if you do learn the Kerem Revoy, we're stuck, because we don't have any extra verse to teach you to recite a bracha. However, the Gemara says, well, maybe there is one way to do it, to figure this, one way to have an extra pasuk. And that is because maybe you could learn a gezerah shava. You could learn if it says one word here and it says one word by another law, so we would be able to learn something from a different law, and then we would have that. If we learn that law from somewhere else, we would have this verse extra, and this verse could teach you a bracha. So the Gemara says, what would that be? So if you learn a gezerah shava, which means the same word here and the same word in another law, so what does it say? So the Gemara says, the Tanya, because we learned in a brisa, Rebbe says, it says over here that about the fourth year, that if you separate the produce of the fourth year, bring it to Jerusalem, it's going to add it will add from into your produce. And it says later on about the law of not mixing a vineyard with your grain. It says over there, utvuas hakerem, and the tavua, the produce of the vineyard. So just like over there, kerem, the tavua means the produce of the vineyard, meaning grapes. Malahalon kerem, afkan kerem, here also, it means the produce of the vineyard means grapes. So even though it says the word tavua, which literally tavua is used for grain, more often tavua is used for grain, but we're seeing that there is another place where it's used as to mean produce. Here also, we're going to translate it as the produce of the vineyard. So if we do that, we don't have to use the word hilulim to teach us something that you sing praises when it's offered on the altar, and that would mean only the wine is obligated in the fourth year produce gift. But instead, we learn that from a gzeira shava, from a different type of teaching. And because we learn it from a gzeira shava, different type of teaching, then we will have extra the word hilulim. And if we have extra the word hilulim, we can learn from there that you would recite a bracha on produce before you eat it. So just to summarize what we've learned today, because it is a little confusing. Don't worry, the whole chapter is not as confusing as this. This is just a little confusing. Again, the Gemara is trying to prove that you have to recite a bracha before you eat, because the Mishnah said all these brachas that a person should recite, blessings on food, and the Gemara is trying to prove it. So initially we wanted to prove it and say the source is the word hilulim, and even Rabbi Akiva seemed to learn this way, that hilulim definitely teaches you about two praises, and for sure means before you eat, you would need to recite a bracha. And then the Gemara said that there are other lessons we learn from the word hilulim, and so it's possible that we're not going to be able to use this word to teach us the bracha. And those two lessons that we learned from hilulim, the Gemara says it could be one of them doesn't really use it for that purpose. Like one opinion says it doesn't only apply to grapes. The other opinion says hilulim teaches you it only applies to grapes. So if you learn the other way, you have hilulim, at least one of them extra. And then the Gemara says, well, even the other opinion that uses both hilulim, and one of them it uses to teach you it only applies to grapes, it could be that he doesn't need it to teach you that it only applies to grapes, because it says the word tavua, which the word tavua has a gzeira shava that it only applies to grapes. And therefore, maybe he can also, even he could have the extra word. He has an extra word, hilulim, and that will allow there to be the extra hilulim to teach you that you would need to recite a bracha before produce. So that's where we're holding now in the Gemara, and our time is up. So wish you a good day. We'll see you a little later.
Thank you,
Rabbi.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rebbe.
Thank you, Rabbi. Bye.